chair lays out House Bill 3667 and recognizes Representative Toth to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Good morning. You're hearing several uniform election bills, so I'll just focus on what my bill does. I do have a committee substitute. The Constitution mentions the right to vote over 5 times. And yet, we're finding that in these non-November elections, the numbers of people that have the right to vote drops down considerably. Bexar County is an example. In 2014, 1.4% of the voters turned out in May to vote versus 31.6% in November. Collin County went from 6.7% to 36%. Dallas County went from 5.2 to 34%. In Tarrant County, again, May turnout 5% to 37.9%. The big problem over and over again we're finding is that people just don't know that the election is being held. This coming May, we have, in my district, we have an $807 million bond election. And the vast majority of people have no clue that that election is being held. Or I'm sorry, that that bond vote is being held. And I simply ask that we give voters a uniform election time so that they know issues are coming before them, and to make it more equitable for them and make it focused on them. Over the years, we've made these bond elections more centric towards local government entities and focused on their needs, their priorities, rather than the voter, we the people. Let's get back to prioritizing individual taxpayers and citizens of our country rather than local entities. Thank you, Madam Chair and members, and look forward to the opportunity to close.
Members, any questions? Chair calls Chris Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Chris Davis on behalf of the Texas Association of Election Administrators, testifying or opposing House Bill 3667 as filed. If we really want to handle and control congestion, it's the view of our members, the county election officers, to give entities the options to have their elections in May and November. That's going to be the source of long lines. In tandem, Madam Chair, with what you mentioned, the absence of straight ticket voting now. That's going to be the issue. That's all I have.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair calls Alan Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying in support of HB 3667. Many of our political subdivisions are financially in deep doo-doo, and at least part of the reason for this growing problem traces to the election dates on which these subdivisions hold important elections. They hold elections for their key leadership and for their debt instruments on election dates when, at max, only 5% of registered voters turn out to vote. So election after election, only about 3% of the registered voters in any of these territories are selecting the leadership and saddling the other 97% of registered voters with mounting debt. Though the state itself appears to be fiscally sound, everything below the state is digging itself into a deep hole. This bill by itself doesn't solve the problem completely, but it's a big step in the right direction. Having more voters involved in the selection of leadership and the approval of debt instruments will help. We urge you to vote this bill out of committee.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair calls Lauren Sullivan.
Good morning. I'm Lauren Sullivan. I'm the Elections Administrator for Young County. And I am opposed to this bill as
And you're representing?
Young County Elections Office.
Okay.
And we are opposed. I'm opposed to this bill as filed. We, because I'm a one-woman office. So that's hard to say. A couple of points. I have talked with school districts and hospital districts about changing to November elections. What we find in small rural counties is the voter turnout for those May elections is the interested voters, the ones who have done some research and understand what the issues are and what the bond is for or who the people are that they're voting about. We have the same requirements for publication as we would in a November election. Voters know when there's an election. One of the other big issues that the districts, both school and hospital, have talked to me about is in November. I, as an election administrator, can contract with those entities, but I can't cross county lines. In May, I can, and I can take over a full school district and run one election for one price rather than, as in a couple of my school districts, crossing county lines and charging each county having a full election price. Those are detrimental to our small rural schools. In Region 9, we have 37 school districts. 20 of those school districts cross at least one county line. Hospital districts tend to follow the same type of boundary lines. Your cities, your home rule cities especially, could end up having to have an election to change the charter, to change the election dates, to move to November. Again, another cost incurred by districts and voters within those districts. So those are just some of the concerns that I had. And I appreciate you letting me come in.
Questions, members? If they are having to change their charter to allow, in the case of the city, might they also have to change the terms of office?
Yes, and depending on how their charter was written, and I only know this from being a city council person myself and looking at changing a charter, it depends on how they determine to change that charter as to how many elections they could end up having. Do we do a one wholesale change of a charter? And charters are not short documents, even in a town of 3,000. I don't remember how many pages, but it was long. Or do we change it piecemeal and hope that we don't have to change other things along the way?
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you. Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party, here in support of House Bill 3667. We believe that the reasons given by Mr. Toth of low voter turnout in these May elections and special elections, that moving elections to November is a good thing, especially if in the more urban counties that we move them to the odd year November elections.
Questions, members? Thank you. Chair calls Ruben Longoria.
Good morning, members. My name is Ruben Longoria. I represent the Texas Association of School Boards, and we are here to testify in opposition to House Bill 3667. Primarily, Section 2 and Section 3 of the bills are the ones that will move all elections to November. For our membership, we have always advocated for local control of these smaller issues. There has been legislation filed this session. It's moving through the process, as it has been throughout previous sessions, that if there is an interest to move from a May election to a November election, then obviously we need legislative approval and then enough time to pass a resolution and adjust the terms if necessary, which would be under Section 2 of the bill. Section 3 would move all bonds to election, all bond elections to November, excuse me. Our concern with that is just on the timing issue itself, especially in highly populated areas. Take Bexar County, for instance. You have about 16 school districts, some water districts, the city, county. If all bonds were on that one day, then you would, and they all pass, and we have pretty good record of these bonds passing in November, then you would create a system of more demand than supply. So what I mean by that is you have all these projects out in the market. So with limited architects and engineers and all these other firms, they're going to be having the opportunity to kind of pick and choose which projects to go with, and maybe leaving some of the smaller taxing units, having to continue to look for other contractors. That's really our main concern with this bill. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, members? Representative Biar?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Longoria, is there any data, there's a couple of races that have already gone through the May election, moved from May to November,
Yes.
is correct? Is there any data from your members as far as what's it cost increase from running in May versus reaching the voters and running in November? Because the universe is going to be larger.
Right, it is. We don't have actual data, what it costs to move. Most of the elections are pretty much shared, whether they are in May or they are in November. So the cost would be, I guess, divvied out depending on by the county administrator or the elections administrator. So I don't know what the cost would be. It does, for those that are in May, and, they may be, part of the joint election law that passed a few years back, state that, any school district within a city must move their election to that city's date. So if that city is based in May, then that's when the school district had their election. So it was a way to consolidate the cost and as well as, I guess, make it easier for voters to kind of go vote on one single, for two entities at one time. But I'm sorry, I don't know the cost share, but I can definitely try to find out for you.
Thank you.
Other questions, members? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
No, Mr. Longoria,
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Representative.
you gave a few reasons against. One was about some kind of supply and demand thing of contractors. Another was about local control. Which one's actually the position of TASB, or are those both of those things the position?
Yes, sir. It'd be both of those positions.
Okay. And what do you do again for TASB?
I'm their Assistant Director for Governmental Relations.
Okay. And TASB is what again?
The Texas Association of School Boards.
How are those dues paid?
How are those dues paid?
Yeah.
By the membership.
Okay, thank you. Tax dollars?
Yes, I would
Thanks,
believe
buddy.
so.
Other questions, members? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Chair calls James Quintero.
Madam Chair, members, James Quintero, Texas Public Policy Foundation, here to testify in support of HB 3667. One of the reasons why we support the legislation is because it'll reconfigure the system in such a way that we encourage greater public participation on important fiscal decisions. So under the current system, you have a setup where a relatively small group of voters can exercise tremendous influence on outsized bond propositions. I tend to think we can do better. And to illustrate my point, what I want to do is point back to my old high school alma mater, Cypress Fair ISD. In May 2014, the district put a $1.2 billion bond proposition before voters, and a relatively small number of voters turned out in that particular election. In fact, only 5% of registered voters turned out to say either yes or no. And of that pool of folks, only 3% actually voted in favor of that $1.2 billion bond proposition. I highlight that because next month, Cy-Fair ISD is going before voters with yet another bond proposition, this time totaling $1.8 billion. And so in a relatively short period of time, assuming voting trends hold, you're going to have, again, a very small number of voters who exercise a lot of influence over billions and billions of dollars of new debt. Now, of course, Cy-Fair ISD is not alone in this kind of behavior, but I do hope that it makes the point that this situation is occurring. And again, I think we can do better. I think we can institute a system where more voters are involved on big decisions. And so that's why I would impress upon the committee to look favorably on this legislation.
Questions, members? Thank you. Chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson, representing myself. I am for HB is it 3667? Okay, good, make sure I got the right number there. And I like to do my testimony once for numerous bills that we're going to hear today, so I may not step up for the other ones. I'll stay in the back and won't say a word, right? And I don't have to come up. This issue has been going on since 2006, really hot and heavy in the voter world when we did the overseas voting where we had to move it to 45 days. It ended up putting the May election for the May uniform election date in between the March primary and the May runoff election. This confuses the heck out of voters. We end up not counting a lot of mail ballots because they get the wrong ballot in the wrong envelope. They have multiple ballots for multiple different elections all at the same time. It is a very, very confusing issue to have an even year May election. Election administrators, I don't understand why the election administrators have suddenly changed, but election administrators for years have been to move this. This is one by Dana Deverois in Travis County. She did a 30-minute demonstration on why even your May elections don't work. It's a little calendar thing that you can show all the overlaps on elections. I saved it. I thought it was pretty neat. This is really a major issue. I heard the percentages. You greatly increase. It goes from a 2 to 3% turnout to a 30 to 40% turnout when you move to November. You get greater participation by far. Been fighting this every session, every year. The true thing here is you don't see a whole bunch of schools and lobbyists here because evidently their lobbyists are already working this behind the scenes, unfortunately. I hope this bill passes. It needs to be for the concern of the voter. Representative Kane, you're definitely right. We have our tax dollars working against us here to inconvenience the voter and make it more difficult for them. It doesn't really lengthen the ballot any much. We already have 200 races in Harris County on the ballot. At most, it would add 7 more races to a ballot. It's not a great inconvenience. It would be great in the election world. My election staff, when I worked in the county clerk's office this last year, we went 2 years straight without ever having vacations or times off because we had back-to-back elections going on constantly. This would be able to at least get rid of the May uniform election so that you could have time that they could have a vacation, because a May uniform election means a June runoff election too that you end up having. So it's not just one election, it's 2 elections that go on here. The bond issues, it doesn't, I mean, what you're hearing about fighting over this, when you pass a bond, you don't have to go cash the money right away. You can wait until several years, a year or 2 later to cash the bond in to go start your project. You don't have to withdraw that money the second the bond passes. So there's no truth to that. This is good legislation. It would be smart to move all districts. I really like this bill and Representative Kane's bill. It moves all elections from May to November. You're going to find that all these districts are going to be opposed to this because they don't want just an odd year May election either, because they never like to have 50% of their board up on one election at a time. So they have elections every year. So only 1/3 of their board is up at any one point in time because it's a 3-year term. It's a little unknown secret. So this actually levels the playing field. If they want to keep playing that game, they would have November elections every year that they could keep doing this. Any questions?
Representative Swanson? Did you have a, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Plugging in our iPhone. Thank you.
Chair calls Bill Sargent.
Bill Sargent, testifying for myself. I'd like to be a resource witness. There was a question that was asked by you about how this affects
Your position on the bill?
just on.
And you're representing
myself.
yourself? Okay.
Santa Fe ISD moved many years ago from May elections to November. The impact on Santa Fe ISD in Galveston County was it was a major increase in expenses because doing it in November meant, because we're doing countywide vote centers, meant that they had to pay for part of each of the polling places that were in their jurisdiction. So it increased the cost to them. At the same time, there was a huge increase in the number of people who voted for that election. So you really have to make a choice. The choice is, are you worrying about money, or are you worrying about voter participation? They made the choice to go for voter participation. They were not happy with the bill they got, but the bottom line is that they got more people voting in that November election.
Representative Fierro.
Sir, how many people were on that ballot that you just referenced?
Oh man, it's several years ago, so I can't remember exactly. But it was for
50, 100?
Oh no. How many total number of people on the ballot?
Yes. How many positions were on the ballot?
I don't know. I'd have to get that back to you. I can get that for you.
So my question is how do you interact with the voter when you're running a school board race or a small municipal race? You're limited funds on both sides, both on the school district and on the person running for office. And then at the end of the day, how many people, we're in the very bottom of the ballot if we're in a school board, how many know about our race?
Well, there are two entities that moved to November. One was League City, the other was Santa Fe ISD. Both of them had a much larger turnout of actual voters for their races. So if that's what you're looking for, countywide vote centers moving to November is a good thing. My personal opinion is that I wouldn't want to have
completely replaced because it will have been.
That's fine, but I'd always leave the option open for May of odd-numbered years because you don't have a conflict with the primaries. But I was trying to,
Sure, no.
to respond to your
thank you
question.
for the information. But my concern is just how do you educate a voter? How do you reach them?
How do you reach the voters?
The field is so thick. There's so many people on that ballot.
Well, you do the same thing you do in any local election. I mean, typically you don't put a sign that's in the next town, even though it's in the same county, in a countywide vote center, because that's not probably where your voter's going to be. But,
Other questions, members? Thank you.
Sure.
Members, we have Keith Ingram here with the Texas Secretary of State. Does anybody have questions for Secretary of State's office? Alrighty, thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Toth to close.
Chairman, members, we've heard some good testimony today. We've heard from folks that are against this bill, and we've heard that only the really interested people will show up to vote in May. We've heard that those that are best educated to vote for these issues come out in May, which we should all find offensive, to believe that people are less interested or just aren't as smart and aren't as informed. We've heard that it's going to increase the costs, which is ridiculous. The city of Austin admitted that to hold a May election, this was in the news this past year, that it increases the amount of money that they spend on elections by $1.1 million a year. We all have a limited amount of resources to go around, and we're here in this session looking for ways to prioritize the classroom, pour more money into the classroom, and also offer property tax relief. All of this money comes from one place, the voter's pocket, their wallet. Let's start prioritizing what really matters. Let's put the emphasis and the focus back on the voter and the property owner and our classrooms, and less on local subdivisions of government and what their needs and wants are. With that, I close.